welcome to the Skeptic Takeout. Oh my God, the takeout.
No.
Why do I do that?
This is the second time that's happened.
It even says hangout. It means you're on my mind.
You just advertise me. Just advertise me. It's fine. We'll have a big Skeptic Takeout banner going across the top. It's fine.
Do it. Yeah. All right. And take two. Hey, and welcome to the Skeptic Hangout, the place where we sit back, relax, and discuss some of humanity's most controversial and intriguing topics through the lens of skepticism. We have with us today Richard Gilliver, who is excitable, pedantic, and colorful, Laura McGee, the energetic, passionate chatterbox, and Richard Gill, who is enthusiastic and witty, yet formless. Today, we will be discussing politics. So, grab your English tea, iced coffee with vanilla creamer, or champagne, and get comfy with us as we unpack the left, the right, and everything in between. So, before we get started, Gilliver, over to you.
Yeah, I just want to make a quick announcement that our very own Laura, who is that way to me, is on The Perspective with Ethan Michael on the 20th, which is
So
the day
exciting.
before our next episode airs. So
Nice.
go and watch her on that. Before you watch us again, go and watch Laura on that way.
Yes.
Go watch Laura.
Skeptic Hangout, Perspective, Skeptic Hangout again.
Yes.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I appreciate it.
No
I'm very
worries.
excited to be doing that. That's gonna be really cool.
I'm very excited to see you on it.
Gil down there is like, I'll miss that.
Yeah.
I'm busy
Gil,
that
have
day.
you got anything you'd like to share with anybody, like a wonderful Facebook group or anything like that? Just
Well, I thought I'd mention it since it apparently has become my job.
It's in the
well,
description.
Yeah. I signed on the dotted line and it was in there in the terms and conditions. Yeah, our Facebook group is a wonderful, fabulous place. And if you're not already there, please do go there. There'll be a description down below or wherever you're accessing this show. I just wanted to as well mention how many different platforms you can find us on. So if you happen to be watching this on YouTube, but actually it'd be really convenient for you to catch the next episode on Spotify or on Apple Podcasts, please do so. So we're on we're on YouTube, we're on Spotify, we're on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, any of the other sort of podcast apps that anyone might use, and you can find us in all of those places. So feel free to subscribe wherever's best suitable for you, and
just subscribe
For
to
all of them. Yeah,
all
thank you.
of even in places you don't use, like sign up for an account on an obscure podcast app that you've never heard of before,
Just
so you
to
can
subscribe to us.
again. Yeah. Special request for this episode.
Okay, so this episode is about politics. And I don't even know where to go with that. So I want you guys to raise your hand if you have any idea where you want to start with talking about politics.
Well, I think Richard should start because Richard mentioned in a couple of episodes ago that he was ultra left, extreme left, ultra left, extreme left. I can't remember the word.
Have you done the political compass test online that you can do? I don't know if you know.
I have
that.
done one, and I came out as liberal too. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Not extreme liberal though, like just barely over the line.
Well, say if you can see my screen and it's sort of up, down, left, right. Am I the right way around? Like, is that the left to you? Or
That's
the right?
my right, but whatever. Yeah.
Okay, so that's left. So there's like top to bottom, like authoritarian to liberal or whatever. And I was like right down sort of here-ish, like really far over in terms of sort of, really left wing in terms of both my sort of ideas about social policies as well as like economic policies and things, and that sort of kind of means like I'm very like if things don't hurt people, they should be probably allowed, but I also kind of believe that if people are also left to their own device in terms of economics, then ill can come from that. So I'm not a massive believer in the free market. I'm not all of that, and it does make me think, like, where did I come up with those ideas? Like, why do I have these opinions about things? I mean, I know my parents are both working class, both do manual jobs, and so I know that people who are in lower socioeconomic classes often have slightly more left-leaning politics, and people who are better off in upper higher classes generally have right-leaning politics. But yeah, it's interesting because lots of these ideas have only come around really in the last sort of 150 years in terms of like the Labour movement in the UK. And I'm not a supporter of the Labour Party, but yeah, politics is interesting because it not only do you have to think about, you know, when you're voting for a political party and when you're taking part in politics, not only do you have to think about what you actually believe in, but you also have to think tactically, like, do I vote for this party because they're more likely to get in when actually I don't believe in what they stand for? But if they take that vote, they'll think I believe in what they stand for, but I'm only doing it to go against these other people who definitely don't believe in what I stand for.
Kind
And
of like our last election. Yeah.
yeah. So like, I imagine that lots of people voted for Biden specifically because they were voting against Trump.
I actually heard that somewhere, like when Trump's son or something was like, I can't believe this many people are voting for Biden on Twitter. And I responded, oh no, they're not voting for Biden. They're voting against your daddy.
Yeah.
Like, don't be mistaken.
Yeah, so I mean, I don't know if I had a point in anything I just said. I think last episode I said I'm good at mixing metaphors. I'm also good at speaking without making any points whatsoever. So I'll turn over to one of you two.
Well, no, I think you made some good points, but you talked about that like spectrum thing. And I took one of those recently, like a few months before the election, just because I was curious. I was raised very conservative and I wasn't really quick to label myself after kind of getting out of that mindset. I was just like, well, I'm whatever. I'm for people, right? And for good things happening. And I took the test and I came out liberal, but I was just barely left of center. And I was thinking about it. A lot of the questions say things like, should we put more money into social programs? And my initial thought was, no, not until we fix how we spend the money in those social programs right now. Like, I'm more for fiscal responsibility and spending the money correctly. Then you add more money to it. Then you increase the programs. So it was difficult for me to approach politics in general in terms of what I believe in and don't believe in. When, like, do you support the concept of this program? Yeah, absolutely. But do you support the program the way it's being run right now? Absolutely not. And so I kind of think I would have fallen further left if the questions had been worded differently. Just because our government right now is so bad at how they handle programs and spending money and like social welfare.
It's like the NHS in the UK. Obviously, it's universal healthcare for all, free at the point of access and all that lot. And if there's this whole sort of thing about like, well, people all generally believe in this idea of universal healthcare, but then there are people proposing like, should it be privatized because it's not working efficiently and all this sort of thing? Like, do we need to change the model completely in order to fix it, or do we stand behind this model? Well, if you're, you know, saying and criticizing the NHS in any way, then it's unpatriotic, and you've got, but you know, like, it's just a fine balancing act between all of these different ideas, and it's really complex. All of it, all this sort of stuff is so complex. It's difficult to know where to stand on anything really without having good evidence, or without, yeah, I don't know, I'm just saying
right words. Well, no, and then why do we even think that privatizing is necessarily the better way to go when other models that are privatized, i.e. us, don't work, right? Like, they're just as bad. So yeah, for me it's more about like, what is the system actually doing versus what it's intended to do, and how can we get it to do what it's intended to do before we even talk about whether or not we need to add more money to it. I mean, I guess to some degree, underfunded programs, maybe that is the problem, right? Like, maybe the only solution is adding more money to it. But I think in terms of whether or not the government can handle things better than like a corporation or private business, I don't know. I kind of think that, like, humans in general, we have a really hard time managing big things. And so the smaller it is, the more local it is, the better. But at the same time, like, am I all for making sure that our people are taken care of, like in terms of social, what do you call it? Like, okay, guys, do my brain.
The welfare state.
Yeah, in terms of like social programs, in terms of help and making sure people are fed and have housing and have education,
unemployment.
That has to start top down. Like, it has to. But when the question is, do you support pumping more money into this program?
Yeah. Like, and I think I sometimes I'm at risk of losing my skeptic hat when it comes to certain political things, because like we were talking about privatization a second ago, and generally speaking, I'm almost never in favor of privatization of anything, especially like big things which I see as being fundamental to how we as a country operate, or things like the railways were privatized, for example, and all I can think of in my mind is, well, the system that we had before didn't work, and so people felt that a change was good. And I don't know the ins and outs of why British Rail was privatized, but it wasn't working effectively. It was privatized, and in lots of ways it did work better, and money was pumped into it.
Mhm.
But I think if we're paying money as a country to get trains, I don't want the profit to go to private companies who are just reaping the financial benefits of that. I want the profits to go into rebuilding the railway better, or making fares cheaper, or increasing carriage capacity, or things like that, which private
Absolutely.
companies don't have necessarily as strong an incentive to do. Things like Royal Mail was privatized, and I imagine Gilva's got lots to say about it, but Royal Mail was privatized. And I just think, okay, Royal Mail's privatized, but therefore all the profits are not going into the service improving, or staff increasing, or anything like that, or being cheaper for the consumer. It's going into the pockets of bigwig rich people. And I think for me, it's one of the things that I think privatization generally, if I hear about something else thinking to be privatized this or whatever, I automatically think that's a bad move. And I think I sometimes I may tend to remove my skeptic hat a little bit, because I associate privatization with, this is a bad move and it will work against my interest, without necessarily looking into the possible benefits of privatization as such. So maybe that's a sort of a foil of mine.
And so, yeah, that's interesting to me, because then I think of, okay, so the government runs it, but then it becomes bureaucracy. So you still have a mini corporation, because you have the sub program, right? Like you have the IRS for us, that handles a lot of our taxes. They're like a subset of the government, but they're their own entity too. So the money that you pump into it, like we have to pay to have employees there, to have the buildings, to have the infrastructure, the computers, right? All the legislation in place. So there's a lot that goes into it. So a lot of those expenses that we think, oh, no, we're going to save those expenses if it's part of the government, and then we're going to have those expenses if it's a business or privatized. That's kind of a little bit of a misnomer. Like, I'd really want to see the numbers, and I'd really want to know, like, what is the truth of that? Because,
but again, there's so much to it as well, isn't there? Like on both sides, like it's
totally.
impossible to know all of the benefits of privatization. It's impossible to know all of the benefits of staying as a public entity. And you can predict either way, and there are pundits on TV spouting this and that. And I think it's one where it's just really hard to get a handle of the truth of the matter.
Yeah. And so to me, I think what's most important is, how is each dollar spent, right? Whether it's spent by a private company or whether it's spent by the government, how effective is it at being spent? Like, how misused is it? How often is the budget like, oh, we have X, like $10,000 left in our budget, so let's buy new office chairs and new markers and pens and a copying machine to try and spend that money, or the government won't give it to us next year, right? If we don't, that's how it works over here. If you don't prove that you can spend the money, your budget gets cut the next year, even though that year you might not have needed so much money, and next year you're going to need more because other things are happening. That it doesn't work that way. So there's a lot of waste of funds just to try and, so that's my big thing is, if it's going to be, whether it's government spent or corporate spent, I don't really care. What I care is each dollar going to the right use, and is it being spent honestly and towards a good purpose? And I just don't think either one handle, like, overall, I don't think that, I think there's a lot of potential for waste.
And there's a lot of ideology and things as well behind it. And I think that's possibly one of the things where I'm at a point in my life where maybe I've dropped religious ideologies, but have held on to other ideologies. And that's a limiting factor in how I assess things. And I guess I can sort of see that and understand that in myself. Jennifer, you've been quiet for a while.
I was just going to say that.
You want to comment on?
I've been quiet for a while, and I thought I was going to have not much to say in this, but you both brought up points I want to address. I would like to say, first of all, sod the poor. I've got my champagne, so I'm okay. No, I've spent a lot of my life not caring about politics. I didn't until a couple of years ago, and I've had a shift in balance on that. And it's really strange because since I met, I don't know when, 15 years ago or so, when I first met my wife, she's actually got a degree in politics. So you'd think it'd be one of the things that kind of connected us. But no, I'm kind of a hippie kind of at heart, and like,
You're a rock star.
My dad was kind of a hippie at heart, and my mum and my older brother, they tend to be kind of the kind of, I don't want to say right-wing leaning, because they're not, because I think they're kind of like a lot of people from Yorkshire, are staunch Labour supporters and will always vote Labour no matter what happens. Regardless of, Labour could probably vote to kill every poor person in the country and they'd still
They're
vote
not
for
going to
them.
vote Tory.
Okay, so
They're never going to vote for the Tories.
So for those of us in the United States that are listening, quickly fill us in on like the difference between the Tories and the Labor. I know we have Democrat and Republican, and that should be clarified too for listeners who aren't familiar with that. So,
well, I'll let Richard do that because he
Okay.
inevitably knows more about politics than I do.
No, well, I think that there's no clear like equivalence in American politics, but because all of our major parties are much more centre than the Democrats and Republicans, but the Conservative Party are predictably slightly more conservative in their general economic policies, and Labour Party are more liberal with economic policies, but the social policies are generally quite compared to American politics, left leaning. So both main parties, even the Conservative Party, is for the socialist universal healthcare that we have in the UK, and are for things like the welfare state, helping people with unemployment benefits and all those sorts of things.
so that's not really, that's not contested between the two then, like those.
No,
Okay.
no, certainly not. And I think things like abortion, gay rights, gay marriage was brought in by the Conservative government in the UK, and those sorts of things. I think one of the big differences, and this is slightly off topic, one of the big differences is I don't see religion as playing a big role in politicians' sort of pushes for policy changes in the UK as much. You do get the odd politician who does, but yeah, indeed, indeed, she who must not be named. But yeah, I think despite there being a massive issue with separation of church and state in the UK, religion doesn't play a massive role in political decision making, whereas it seems to a lot more in the United States.
I think it does. Yeah, I think there's a lot of correlations between different political spectrums and different religious persuasions.
Yeah.
And I think it's fascinating to kind of hear that, like the difference between liberalism and conservatism between the United States and the UK. Like we could probably spend the whole episode just on that, because I don't know much about your guys' politics. And so it's fascinating to me to hear things like, oh, social programs are pretty generally accepted. I'm wondering if it's because you guys have the system in place and it benefits the people and they see how it benefits them. Whereas with us, we are told socialism equals communism equals fascism equals Nazis and killing people, right? There's all these links that just don't actually exist. But it's very ingrained in us. So it's interesting to me to hear how different the political platform or the political climate is in your country versus my country when it comes to social programs.
I think the one caveat I would put in there in terms of the religious ideas is that Northern Ireland is a sort of special case in the UK in terms of religion plays a much bigger part in Northern Irish politics with the sort of Protestant Catholic divide. But again, I don't know if that's as much to do with actual religious belief as it is to do with like sort of cultural norms in those two groups of Northern Ireland. And Northern Irish politics is not my area of expertise in general, but I know that that is certainly a big factor there. One example is that abortion was legal in the whole of the UK apart from Northern Ireland up until very
wow.
recently, because the Northern Irish Assembly, which is the devolved sort of local government structure in Northern Ireland, didn't vote for that to be passed because of sort of conservative religious ideas. But recently there was a shutdown in the Northern Irish Assembly, and so the UK government sort of stood in and said, no, this needs to be enforced across the whole of the UK as a sort of, and that was obviously the Conservative government who pushed that forward. And I think a lot of the, and again, I don't want this to be a UK versus American thing, but like,
No.
it really strikes me as just bizarre how big a part religion plays in the sort of, the language that is used in America, and the way, God is mentioned by the president in nearly every speech that is made, and things like my thing about this is like, religious beliefs are fine, and I'm fine with people holding religious beliefs, and they don't impede on the rights of other people. And so it's okay for someone to themselves believe that abortion is bad and therefore not choose to have an abortion if they're in that situation.
Absolutely.
But to then impose those religious ideas and those beliefs because of your own ideas on someone else who doesn't hold those ideas is fundamentally wrong. And so if you disagree with abortion, don't get an abortion, or don't propose it to someone.
It's like what Whoopi Goldberg said, where she was like, if you are against gay people, then don't marry a gay person.
Right? Yeah.
It's not a difficult
it's not hard
philosophy to follow, is it?
But like the gay marriage thing, two gay people who love each other and want to get married, like, does not affect anyone. People talk about it destroying the sanctity of marriage because God made marriage for a man and a woman and all this. Like, their marriage doesn't affect you.
I object to that because my best friend is gay and I want her to get married so badly because I'm desperate to be her best man. So it does affect me. It
does affect, yeah. You know what? Talking about like the, and I know we're going down like sort of a rabbit hole, but this does relate to politics and it does relate to legislation and government and stuff. The whole argument that gay marriage deteriorates the marriage structure, like I just want to scream, because it's like, no. Heterosexual marriage or heterosexual people do just fine tearing apart the concept of marriage all by themselves. They don't need gay people to ruin marriage. Like, we do just fine by ourselves.
Yeah.
Now, I think if anything, like, because they have to fight so hard to have those relationships and fight so hard for that right, those relationships, in my opinion, and I'm not saying that like, oh, a gay marriage is stronger than a hetero marriage. What I'm saying is like, that marriage structure is all the more sacred to them because they have to fight for it. Does that make sense?
That does make sense. In the same way as, I hear women telling other women that they need to make sure they absolutely do vote because women died for women to have the right to vote. Do you know, it's a similar sort of idea,
Right.
Like, there's been that struggle, there has been that fight, and it's not saying that gay people must therefore get married, but like the idea that because I believe that's wrong, therefore they shouldn't do that, when
Right.
on your point aside, Gilliver, but like, someone else being married to someone they love doesn't impact my life in a massive way. And if I'm married in a heterosexual marriage, that doesn't affect anyone else in their marriage. Like, it's irrelevant. It's just irrelevant.
Yeah.
There's a very simple way of looking at things like that, and that is allow all freedoms until they can be shown to be harmful. And when they're shown to be harmful, then outlaw them. Don't start from the other end. Don't just outlaw everything and then
start giving freedoms.
Yeah.
That, I think you nailed my politics right on the head, is to have as little legislation and regulation and laws as possible, and only have those laws that are designed to protect people, to keep them safe, and to keep some sort of structure within our communities and our culture and our society. And
can I repay the favor then? Because earlier on you were talking about doing things small, and the only politics, like the only economics book I've ever read was by a long time ago, and I actually want to ask you both a question around this.
Yeah.
It was a book called Small is Beautiful by a guy called E.F. Schumacher, and the basic premise of it was that if you keep things small, if you keep things local, when your business makes profit, reinvest that profit into the business. You reinvest it, everybody gets a share of the profit at the end of the day. You reinvest some of it, you give the employees, all the employees,
Yep,
a
share of the
it
money.
at the end of the day, and that is really prosperous. It's a really hard, it's a slog of a book to get through. It's really difficult, but it's so worthwhile. Now, I loved it. I thought it was a brilliant kind of template to use. My concern with it is it doable in this day and age? What do you guys think about that? Is that template as romantic and idealized and as good as it is it actually doable in the world we live in at the moment?
I think it certainly can and could be. I think it, as an idea, I really stand by things like that because, I mean, wealth inequality and income inequality is a thing that really gets to me in a lot of ways. You know how some people are billionaires while other people can't afford food, and I think certainly lots of people don't have incentives to work hard because they think, well, the boss in that office is earning 5 times as much as I am and he doesn't do half as much work as I do. The sort of structure that you're talking about actually really incentivizes people to work effectively and efficiently in a way that they see actual real life benefits to them. Like they're
that
actually
it'll come back
working,
around to them.
they're working to improve their own lives because they're working to earn more money for their family, which you can then spend in the economy at large and help other businesses earn more money for their families. And it goes on like that, as opposed to all of those profits just being swallowed up by the tier above the tier above the tier above the tier above them.
Laura. And billion-dollar companies. Yeah, so I think yes and no, that it's viable. Yeah, of course that's a doable template, right, to follow. It's on paper, it looks great, but I'm kind of a realist, and as a realist, there's a human nature element involved, and human nature to a large degree is greedy. Like, the reason we have billionaires like that is because they want to be billionaires like that. They don't want to spread the wealth back down, and they have many justifications for it. Like, I've heard very eloquent justifications for why we need the wealth to be hoarded at the top, and it's bullshit, like the reinvesting into other businesses and the movement and the power. Like, oh, I have the power now to hire 4,000 employees because I have this money and I can create this business, and boom, now there's 4,000 employees. Sure, that sounds great on paper, but as long as we have that mentality, then at least widespread, that kind of a template isn't realistic. Like, it's workable, it's doable, and it makes sense, and it would benefit everybody, right? It's just a matter of how do you get the buy-off? Like, how do you get buy-in?
Do you think that's just and I'm throwing this out there, this is not a question I have an answer to. I'm going to ask a question and give an example.
Okay.
Do you think that is just the attitude of those at the top, though? Because I know people who you'd call probably in Britain, they're probably middle class, the business owners, people like that. They're not super wealthy, but they've certainly got a lot more money than I have. And the very left leaning as well in the politics, and they're really critical of these people at the top who aren't willing to spread their wealth around. Yet they don't spread their wealth around either. And they justify that as by saying, well, we don't have the kind of money to spread around. You've certainly got a lot more disposable money than I have.
Yeah, I just don't have the fun. Oh, I don't think that it's just a wealthy person problem. I think it's a human nature problem. Yeah. I think the most generous or the most giving people are the ones that don't have as much to lose, right? And I don't have any survey data available on that, but and I'm not saying that wealthy people aren't generous, but I do think that there is that element of greed, that it needs to stay at the top or else, and until you can convince those people otherwise, and that includes the middle class, I think.
Richard?
Yeah, so I was thinking in terms of a specific British example recently. with the test and trace system. So
The what
the
system?
test and trace. So with COVID, one of the ways that they
Oh,
tried to sort of combat the spread is that anyone who gets a positive test result basically gets in touch with the NHS test and trace system, and they do like a contact tracing thing. So they get in touch with people who I would have been in touch with in order to
right.
tell them self-isolate for however many days to try and stop the spread. There was a big national program of it, and there was a website and an app, and it all basically went to shit. It wasn't working effectively at all, whereas there were much smaller local versions of that within like a local authority area, like a council area, or within an NHS trust area that worked really effectively because smaller things are much more manageable. And I think that's sort of a good metaphor and a good sort of way of looking at lots of these other big ideas. I didn't have a bigger point than that, but yeah, I thought it was just an example that came to mind from what you were saying
That
before.
was an appalling system. I remember when we all got COVID within a couple of days of each other. My wife got it first, and then me and the kids, I presume we caught it off my wife way back in November. And they phoned us up. They phoned literally every day to apparently help you, be helpful. One day we had 12 phone calls between 8 o'clock in the morning and 12 noon for my she was 4 at the time, for my 4-year-old daughter, asking exactly the same questions.
Oh,
and they'd not copied, they'd not saved the information. It was just a mass waste of money.
And there were lots of things about, like, because the whole point of it is like, say if me and you, Jill, had been in contact the day before and I got COVID today, that they ring you as soon as possible so that you stay at home and don't spread that to people unwittingly because of the asymptomatic bit at the beginning of the disease. Whereas there were things that you saw online or in newspapers about like people getting phone calls 7 to 10 days after test and trace had been involved, saying now you must self-isolate. It's like, well, you've been living your life for 7 to 10 days and going out, but these
it's
local
already
ones,
too late. Yeah.
too late, far too late. But these small local groups were much more effective at getting to people who needed it and getting in contact with people and joining all those dots in a way that this big, overwhelming national thing just couldn't. So yeah, it was just, that was an example that just came into mind when you were talking about smaller is better earlier on.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's a good example. And it's not to say that we can't have overarching governments, but pushing things down to the local level allows for that flexibility of like, oh, hey, we do things differently here because we're rural in their city, or we have a like higher low population, or this is the type of economic system that we need for our area versus that economic system. And yeah, it just makes way more sense to have things as localized as possible. And
which
I would
potentially works.
Go ahead.
Which potentially works better for you in the States, because that is in essence, to a degree, what you've got with the state laws and things, isn't it? We don't have like...
Yeah. I mean, I think we're still kind of heavily regulated on the federal side, though. You know, like there's still a lot that there's federal oversight for that could be like, they could let go of that, right? I think we have too much federal control. That's just my personal opinion.
But then there's that thing as well, isn't there, of like, because in the UK, I think a federal system of government would be an ideal in terms of like, we've got devolved administrations in Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. I would like to see that rolled out in regions across the UK. In England, sorry, not in the UK, in England. But yeah, it can go the other way around as well. So things like I was saying about like Northern Ireland and the UK government imposing those abortion laws on Northern Ireland because they didn't push those through themselves. You can argue that two ways, can't you? Like lots of people can say, well, having the right to an abortion should be something that is a right and a human right, and in the 21st century is something that should be legally allowed in a developed country. But then other people like, but the people of that country voted for people who disagreed with those ideas, and should the UK government have imposed that upon Northern Ireland? And obviously, I don't know how au fait you two are with the specifics of that, but it is that thing of like, is this a greater good thing, or is it more important than that people in a place agree with an idea? Or like you were saying, Laura, with, you know, you think there's too much federal oversight or too much federal regulations in various things. You know, could that be that people would praise that because they disagree with things that a certain state has done, or a certain thing that a state has overruled or changed, because they agree with the federal thing, in which case they think federal oversight is brilliant. Whereas if the federal government is going against things that you agree with, they think, well, too much federal oversight is bad. And
right, and it becomes kind of sort of a sticky or slippery slope or whatever. So I agree with you. So I would make a clarification that I do think that in terms of protections or human rights, I think that there should be the highest level of oversight on that. Like, I think that when you're talking about protecting people, it should be across the board. And like, that is where I think that religious exemptions should never exist. That's where I think things like state laws should not exist. I think that the federal government, their main purpose should be like, well, among like infrastructure and military and protection and stuff like that. I think protecting people's rights should be something that they do regulate more heavily. But in terms of like how a business does something, or how COVID is run, or things like that, I think that there needs to be minimal federal regulation, but maximal federal protection, if that makes any sense.
That does make sense.
Yeah. Okay, episode over. Like, you both just stop and stare.
I think that, as I said, I didn't get start looking at politics till a couple of years ago, pretty much at all. And I was one of these people who said, don't vote, nobody vote. If we all vote, we can change the system, freedom and all this. And I've changed my mind on that now. I think even though I don't, my main line of thinking before was that, there was nobody who was saying the things I wanted to hear.
Yeah.
And because
it's
nobody was
like voting for the lesser evil. So it's like you're voting for somebody you don't believe in, because that's kind of, I guess, the best option. But if you don't feel like there's anyone speaking for you,
don't vote at all. Yeah.
Why would you vote?
And I've changed my mind on that, I think, a bit now, and I still think that nobody speaks on my behalf so much, but yeah. I also think that maybe voting for the level is the best way to go to make changes, and to try and get things done as much as possible, because I'm 43 now. I've been voting not voting since I was 18. And there's still nobody speaking for me. So not voting's clearly not worked. You know what I mean?
So yeah, the way that I approach this with my children, because they were all like, the teens were pretty disillusioned, and they were like, I wouldn't vote if I was legally old enough to vote. The way that I put it to them is, if you abstain from voting, you have the right to do that, and nobody should tell you you have to vote. But if you abstain from voting, you have to realize that you are at the mercy of everybody else. So when somebody else votes instead, they go and vote for if you really hate a particular political party and you think that they're damaging, you're allowing those people to go out and vote on that political party's behalf, but you're not voting against that or to change that. So you are at the mercy of whatever everybody else decides. And if you're okay with no representation, and you're okay with just going with the flow, you don't care how it turns out, then by all means, if that's what you want, don't vote. But the second you don't vote, don't complain about the outcome, because you decided to be passive and do nothing, right?
Yeah, I think it's never too late to change your mind on things. Mm-hmm. Once and it was good argumentation that changed my mind on that. Mm-hmm. I didn't just wake up one day and decide, oh, that's it, I'm going to start voting now. Right. Even though I still don't trust any of them. It was listening to people, mm-hmm. and allowing, I think that's a good idea. And over time, listening to those arguments, my mind was changed. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the best way to sometimes you might be really against something. You might be so against something. Like I was talking about earlier, a lot of people in Yorkshire are staunch Labour people, and they'd probably follow them until World War III, just to avoid voting for the Tories. Sometimes you're and I'm not condoning one party over another here, but sometimes you have to sit back and say, right, what is the best thing to do? What is the bigger picture? How can I make things better for myself in the long run, rather than just having this dogged determination, which is based on nothing other than several generations of people before me.
And like team
same
loyalty,
thing.
right?
Yeah.
Like I hate team loyalty.
Football
Like,
chant politics.
yeah, you can be like a 49ers fan all you freaking want, but at least be open to the facts, right? Like, hey, they haven't won a game in that season or whatever, you know. Yeah, so you can call yourself whatever political party you want, but what really bothers me is that the staunch loyalty that, like, even if I disagree with my party, I am going to stay with my party. And that is where problems never get fixed and where politics turns sour and bad and where you get corrupt politicians and all that. So people are not willing to put their party affiliation on the line in order to fix some of the problems within their party.
When I was doing, I was talking earlier about the political compass test, at the various UK general elections, it plots all the political parties whereabouts they sit on that spectrum, so you can see like which one is closest to where you are politically. And I think I did it with some people in my family, and they were like you were saying, Gilliver, staunch Labour supporters and always have voted Labour just ad infinitum. But like, even though that test showed that they agreed with, say, the Green Party or whatever more, they were like, well, even though my politics line up with the Green Party's politics more than the Labour Party politics, because the Green Party won't get into government, there's no point voting for them. And I want to know sort of your two's opinions in terms of, and I know it's a bigger issue in terms of third parties in the United States, because it really is a two-man race.
Hugely.
Yeah. But like, I've voted in the past for Liberal Democrats, Labour Party. I've voted for the Green Party at different times and for different reasons in different sorts of elections, whether it's local or general or European Union elections. But yeah, what do you two think in terms of sort of that tactical voting of, well, I shouldn't vote for the party I actually believe in because it's a wasted vote, as opposed to I should vote for the party that's going to have the best chance of getting in to kind of most align with what my needs and desires and wants are in terms of policies and things. What do you two think?
I don't know. I genuinely don't know. I'd go down there. I think my gut feeling is to say that I would go with the one that represented me more, regardless of the tactic. But I don't know. I think it'd come down to the situation. I think it'd come down to, honestly, I think it'd come down to looking at the bigger picture. The tactical vote was against what if it was against something that was relatively minor, it probably wouldn't persuade me to do it. If it was against a major bill like making homosexual marriage illegal, if it would, then I'd vote tactically without a shadow of a doubt to stop an injustice like that. If it came to a huge injustice, I'd vote tactically. If it was a minor, it's just going to stop this party who you're slightly less favourable of getting in, I'd probably go with the ones that I were more favourable towards.
Because Laura, that matches up kind of closely with what we're saying in terms of the most recent presidential election,
right?
In terms of people voting for not Trump rather than for Biden. Whereas there may have been third-party candidates or independents or whoever that may have aligned more closely with what people were, actually wanting in a president, for example. I don't really know much about other candidates.
Yeah.
But yeah, go on.
Well, I was going to say, like, that was a huge debate all over social media, in families and stuff like that, is especially for those people who are third-party supporters, was the argument within the third parties of, no, we have to jump ship on the third parties and vote for or against this one candidate. And here's why, right? And then no, we all have to vote third party in order to get the third party candidate to get enough power to at least get more representation so that the next election they'll be better in the next election, right? My argument is, by the time it hits, especially like presidential elections, by the time it hits those big elections, it's already too late. So it doesn't even matter how you vote during the big presidential elections if you're a third party person. It matters what you do between the elections. Build your numbers, build your platform, build your supporters, get your message out there, get on social media, be activists. Like, third party people need, because I have a feeling that there are a lot more people who are middle of the road than far left or far right. I mean, just like based on polls and data and stuff that I've seen, I think the majority of the people aren't these really far out there on the political spectrum people. And so if you want to start getting some more middle of the road representation, you need to do it between elections, not at the election. So having said that, yes, it does make a statement when you have, it's like something like 6% voted third party. And within the third party, within that 6%, it's even further fractured, like Green Party, Libertarian, and yeah, all of them. So then it gets down to like the 1s and 2%, right? So there is no party. There is no representation. That's a tiny percentage. So if you want that number to grow, you can't do it at the, like, yes, it does send a statement when you see those numbers eking up a little bit at a time and more people get a little bit more inspired to follow their gut and vote for one of those political parties. But you do still have a great majority of people that are like, hey, no matter how you vote, it's going to be a Democrat or it's going to be a Republican. So you have to decide which one you want representing you. And that is where like I split my vote, like depending on who it was, whether it was local or like, so for the presidential election, I won't say who I voted for, but I did not vote third party. But for a lot of the local politicians, I voted third party. And for a lot of the laws and stuff, I voted for people who would support like sort of the third party, whereas it's kind of more liberal, but not quite like.
You see, like on those sorts of more local things, you can vote on a more personal sort of issue by issue basis, can't you? Like, because you know the sort of direct results of, you know, things that will directly affect you in your life in your local area and all those sorts of things as well.
And you have more impact. You can vote for a third party person locally and it has a bigger impact, right?
Yeah.
So taking it slightly away from party politics and talking more about issues then, what is the single biggest thing that you would consider the single biggest issue, whether it's in your local area or nationally or internationally? What is the single biggest issue that you think politics needs to get together on, strive together on, and find a solution to or make better?
Climate change.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's a
without
big
a shadow of a doubt, climate change. And this is one of those where I can understand the people who are like, no, we're a coal mine in town. We mine coal here. Our jobs are dependent on this. We need to have this coal mine in order to carry on living our lives. And, you know, yeah, people can talk about a green revolution and all these green jobs that are going to come in, but that's not going to affect us in this town here. And so we need to carry on with this. And so I can understand those sorts of reservations that people have. But I think I think I'll steal one of Gilliver's regular lines, and steal. Well, basically, you can sum up what Gilliver says in any episode by just saying human brains are rubbish. So I'm going to do a human brains are rubbish sort of spiel about like climate change is really big. It's in the future slightly, so it's not happening now. So there's that whole thing of like, oh well, I'll check on that job tomorrow because I don't have to worry about it today. But also, there are so many things that are interconnected, and that's why these big sort of whole world agreements like the Paris Climate Accord and things like that are so important, because it will take all of us to tackle this sort of issue. Skeptically, you know, there are lots of people who deny climate change even now, despite the vast majority of science being absolutely demonstrating that climate change is happening and will continue happening more and more rapidly if things don't change. And despite us having a very good understanding of the effects of climate change and what will, how the world will be just devastated in a myriad of ways because of it, and how we can stop that from happening. But it takes political will and political courage. And when politicians have the next election in their mind and they're thinking, well, I need to just keep people believing in me enough to get to that next election, they're not thinking about policies that will affect in 50 years' time. They're just thinking, well, in 4 years, there's another election and I need to get in. So I'm going to tell those people in this town that they can keep their jobs burning coal. And I'm going to tell the people in this town that, you know, and it's that battle between what's actually important in the world and
your fan base.
Yeah, and your fan base, because you do see it all the time where it's like people are worried about their own personal political careers, and they could do damage to their own political, the chance of re-election by going for these things where it might cost people money, cost people their jobs. Taxes might need to go up in order to pay for some of these innovations and changes that need to be made. But they eventually do need to be made, and at some point it's going to be too late. And so when you ask what's the sort of biggest thing, biggest issue at the moment, and it is worldwide, that's what it is. As well as that, there's a big issue between rich developed countries like all of ours compared to sort of developing countries in the world where they don't necessarily have the resources to work in the same direction. And I think we need to all work together in order to support countries all over the world in that regard too.
And I think we could do it too. Like, I don't think it's that unreasonable to spread wealth and prosperity around everywhere. It just takes a little bit of grit and determination, and just so many people are not willing to do it. And it takes a little bit of sacrifice too. Like, we have our
Yeah.
standard of living that we are not willing to change one little iota unless we're changing it up. But we don't give a flip about the people who don't even have our current, standard of living, let alone a higher one. Right. So
Yeah.
it does take a little bit of, I may need to sacrifice the price of milk in order for someone in another country just to have heat,
Yeah.
So so that segues right into what I would say, which, I mean, I'm fully in agreement there with climate change and with the balance of economic development across the world, but is human rights, like, in general. And it's so broad, but it's like, we shouldn't even have to have like LGBTQ rights and Black people and Asian and the rights of all these different minorities. It should just be like human rights across the board, for crying out loud. Like, if there's a person being raped and forced to marry in Pakistan, it should be just as important to me as if it was my neighbor. If there's a person who's starving in Africa or South America or anywhere in the world, it should be just as important to me as that person who's starving, like, within my city and within my town. So it's one thing, I get the whole donating to local charities and local governments. I think that's hugely important, and I get that it's really hard for an individual to know what they can do to help someone across the world. But if we were going to focus on something, it would be that human rights are not a luxury, and it's not something that you get based on where you're born or what your affiliation is or what your skin color is. It's just something that we defend and protect and fight for across the board, period. Off soapbox. There you go.
Yeah. What about you, Gilliver?
I'd say climate change.
He's
I'd
like,
say-
screw you both.
No, I'd say climate change. I've mentioned before on the show that when I was young, that we had winters, we had 4 seasons, and we don't have that anymore here.
Mhm.
And it's so evident to me that, I'd lay a prediction down that in possibly within 30 years, definitely within 50 years, if we don't change the way we're doing things, there's not going to be anything left to change. Yeah, I genuinely fear for my children. I've got all 3 of us have got young children, and I genuinely fear for those children. Genuinely, that is the one thing above all else that makes me fear for the children. And that's climate change, and is not doing anything about it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's rather somber now.
Yeah, it is rather somber. No, I agree with you. I think that I kind of wanted to throw something else out there that is also a concern. But I think that also at the same time, when we say things like, what's the one thing we can do? I think oftentimes that's a bit of a misnomer, because there's multiple things we can do at the same time to improve things.
Definitely.
And so I do think it's good that if there is something that is critical that we need to attack, let's attack it. But let's not forget that there's other little things that we can attack at the same time. So that's where I think politics gets really complicated, is like, what do we focus on and when, and how do we have the biggest, most positive impact? And I think a lot of times we kind of get it wrong, right?
And it's like, just because climate change, as an example, might be a big thing that governments across the world should be focusing on, and rightly so, and putting lots of energy and effort and time and money into those endeavors. Kids still need teaching. and
Yeah.
hospitals still need medicine in the cupboards, and all those other things still need to carry on going. And if those don't happen, then there's no point in even striving for climate change to be sorted, because everything else will have broken down in the background. Like, yeah, I agree with what you're saying.
This is actually an interest. I've literally just thought about this. This is just an interesting topic to show where governments are doing something right, and where sometimes governments do need to lay down legislation to people. Because when I was back, when we had 4 seasons, when I was younger, we had one bin outside that went out to the garbage men, and that was it. Just one bin that everything went in. And now we have like a brown bin, a green bin, a blue bin, a black bin for all various different kinds of waste and for recycling and things like that. And a lot of people have been resistant to that change, to having all those bins. And if it wasn't for the government laying down that legislation, it wouldn't have happened.
Yeah.
And that ain't a party politics thing. I'm talking about governments across the board laying down those legislations, making people saying, you're right, you've got to have a blue bin for your paper recycling, got to have a brown bin for your plastic bottles and your whatever, and your green bin for your garden waste, and forcing people to have them. And there's been I've talked to people who've had, like older people, who've had massive resistance to that and didn't want that.
Other ways that like legislation can really positively make behavioral changes in people in order for people to really appreciate something and its impact. It's things like in the UK, we've had the plastic carrier bag fees that have been in since, I can't remember when they were introduced, like 2000, some early 2010s, was it?
I don't remember what year it was.
I don't remember, but there was a mandatory 5p charge for a plastic carrier bag, and most places charge more than that now. But before that, plastic carrier bags were free. You go to the supermarket, you might come out with 10, 15 carrier bags, but all of which would just end up in landfill and then non-biodegradable and all that. As soon as people sort of came across a charge of 5p, and people were up in arms about this at the time, because being charged something, even though 5p is like a negligible amount of money for most people, like literally the tiniest amount of money, because they were having to pay for them, suddenly change their habits and either use reusable bags, or now lots of people buy paper bags, or just don't use bags and have like baskets or whatever else. And it's that sort of thing that is like a small change, people resistant to it, but now it's had a really big, broad impact across the country. But then you can ask the question, can't you, in terms of like, is it a government's job to sort of manipulate people's behavior in that way? And
it gets really complicated, doesn't it? Because some stuff really genuinely is harmful. I mean, aren't we manipulating people's behavior when we say that, like we're not allowed to murder, or you can't steal or whatever? So I get that there's a sort of a slippery slope there that could happen, but I think in general, if we have a foundation that you're talking about protecting people and protecting the environment and stuff like that, I mean, there's a point where you kind of have to, because people aren't doing it on their own. Like if you think about the mask thing, it's like, if y'all would just choose to wear your masks, it wouldn't need to be mandated. But the fact that you're being so petulant about it and you're putting other people's like lives at risk, you are forcing the government to do the very same thing that you're saying the government shouldn't be doing. And if you would just do it yourself, the government wouldn't have to step in and do anything. So there's a point where people are so resistant to doing something that's inconvenient to them because it would have a positive impact on other people, that there's a point where like, and where the line is super fuzzy. I get it. But there's a point where you just have to.
Yeah.
Do we get the feeling that when we get feedback from this episode, we're going to get hammered?
It's going to be rough. So why don't we switch gears now? And since we only have a few more minutes left, I did want to hit one thing really quickly, but because I love getting that from a skeptic's perspective, I think it should even be like the ending segment each time. How would you, as a skeptic, and look, there's we got about 5-10 minutes left. So how would you really quickly approach when you're presented with a political idea or a political position? How do you weigh which side you're on? Gil,
I think it's easy. Like Jilva was saying earlier on, people often get in their minds, well, this is the party that I am a proponent of, and so therefore the other guys are saying it, so I disagree with it. And I think you can often see that, for example, in the Houses, in like the House of Commons, when there's a debate and they've got like a whip system. So obviously, like the people are forced to vote for things that they don't necessarily believe in because they are part of that party, and that's how it works. But I think with everything, and I said earlier on how I voted for different political parties at different times in different situations, depending on what they were proposing. I think it just needs to be, and certainly I think in terms of what's best not only for me and my family, but what do I perceive to be the best for other people as well. So I mean, I'm not poor by any stretch of the imagination, but I don't consider myself particularly well off either. But I know that, like, say if my wage goes up much more, I might enter a different tax bracket or whatever else. And it's like, do I vote selfishly in order to try and avoid a tax increase for me and my family when I know that tax money will go to people who need it more than I do? Or do I vote against my own sort of against my own, my family's well-being and all that, like, in order to benefit other people? And I think you have to weigh all of that up in your mind and consider all of that. But lots of people don't, and lots of people just sort of go with what they've always gone with, or just don't think about it in those sorts of terms. That's what I try to do, and I don't necessarily get it right all the time. But yeah, I guess that's sort of where I.
So it sounds kind of like virtue politics in a way. It's like what is the positive outcome?
Yeah.
Gilliver.
I think I'd look at situations in a similar sort of way. I think just try and weigh up the pros and cons of each individual situation and do the best I can from that, and be aware that I might make mistakes, and just, and be willing to learn from those mistakes if I do.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I'm on the same page. I think a lot of it has to do less with party and less with a specific ideal, and more with what's the actual outcome, right? And if the actual outcome is more beneficial than harmful, I'm more in support of that than something where you can't demonstrate why it's a good idea,
I think politics often, when you see it on the TV and things, it can be boiled down into a soundbite, or it can be boiled down into a slogan, and that can be really dangerous. Brexit as a relative, well, it's not even that relatively recent, is it? The
Not anymore.
Years ago now, but like, £750 million a week for the NHS across the side of a bus sounds positive and it sounds like a good thing. But you've got to put your skeptic's hat on and think, actually, does this add up? Do these things make sense? And therefore, should I support it? And yeah, that just sort of as an example of the sorts of things that we were all saying there. I think we're on a similar page.
Awesome. Well, that's like a perfect place to end it then. So thank you all for joining us. And I know that when it comes to like the two things, religion and politics, that's where people get the most emotional, and that's where fights break out and stuff like that. And so I am sure that there are people out there that disagree on our individual opinions. And you know what? I'd love to hear it, as long as it's not disrespectful or antagonistic. Let's have the conversation. Like, what do you think about politics and how to decide?
You can be antagonistic to me. I don't mind. I'll hit you right back.
Okay, a little bit of antagonism. Yeah, we've got thick skin, so a little bit of antagonism is, I don't even know how I said that right, is good. But you know what I mean? Like, it doesn't have to be an all-out brawl, but let's discuss these things and just tell us where you disagree and why, and we can start discussing it, because who knows, maybe you'll change our minds, right?
Yeah, I think we've all said before, we're very, very happy to have our minds change with good information or good
Absolutely.
reason. And I think it's really healthy to have those discussions and think about those things in different ways. Before we disappear, I did want to just remind people, if they've managed to stick out this episode until the bitter end, once again, please do join our Facebook group if you haven't done so, and feel free to find us on as many different platforms as you can, because I think it's it's good to experience us in different ways.
Absolutely.
And go and watch Laura on The Perspective on Tuesday.
Yes, I will be watching for you in the live chat, so you better be there. All right, so in the meantime, we are Laura,
Richard,
and this has been Skeptic Hangout. Until next time,
keep questioning,
interrogate your beliefs,
and stay skeptical.
Bye.
Ta-ra.